Hey, you there in the hoodie. Stop right where you are.
Excuse me, officer? Is there a problem?
Don't play games with me. What are you doing casing the police station? You think we're
Casing?
stupid?
I'm walking to work, officer. I'm Detective
So now
Sergeant
you're
Jackson with...
impersonating an officer too?
Real smart, G.
February 3rd, 2023, 2:30 p.m. A decorated police detective walked confidently down a sunny Florida street, heading to headquarters after lunch. He carried case files in his backpack and wore casual clothes on this ordinary Thursday afternoon. What happened in the next 12 minutes would destroy a rookie cop's career and spark a $2.3 million federal lawsuit that exposed the ugly truth about racial bias in American policing. The sun beat down on Bay Street in Jacksonville, Florida, casting long shadows across the concrete sidewalks. It was a typical Thursday afternoon in early February, with temperatures hovering around 75 degrees and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby harbor. Downtown Jacksonville buzzed with its usual mix of business people, tourists, and locals going about their daily routines. The police headquarters stood just 3 blocks away, an imposing brick building that housed one of the largest police departments in the state. Detective Sergeant Jocks Jackson had just finished his lunch at Murphy's Deli, a small family-owned restaurant where he had been eating for the past decade. At 42 years old, Jackson was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. His 6-foot frame carried the confident posture of someone who had spent 15 years protecting and serving his community. His dark skin showed the slight weathering of a man who had walked countless beats and answered thousands of calls, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that made him such an effective detective. Jackson had built an impressive career within the Jacksonville Metropolitan Police Department. His record was spotless, decorated with commendations for bravery, community service, and outstanding detective work. He had solved some of the city's most challenging cases, earning the respect of his colleagues and the trust of the community he served. His fellow officers looked up to him, not just for his professional skills, but for his ability to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the neighborhoods they patrolled. At home, Jackson was a devoted family man. He had been married to his wife Maria for 18 years, and together they had raised 3 children who were the pride of his life. His oldest son was studying criminal justice in college, inspired by his father's example of service and integrity. Jackson spent his free time coaching youth basketball at the local community center and volunteering with programs that helped at-risk teenagers find positive paths forward. He believed deeply that police officers should be pillars of their communities, not just enforcers of the law. Just 2 weeks earlier, Jackson had received news of his promotion to detective sergeant, a position that would put him in charge of supervising new recruits and junior detectives. He was looking forward to the opportunity to shape the next generation of law enforcement officers, to teach them the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. On this particular afternoon, Jackson was dressed casually in dark jeans and a navy blue hoodie. His leather backpack contained several case files he planned to review once he got back to headquarters. He had spent his lunch break reviewing witness statements for an upcoming court case, and his mind was focused on the details of the investigation as he walked the familiar route back to work. The sidewalk was moderately busy with pedestrians, and Jackson nodded politely to the business owners he recognized along the way. Nothing about this moment suggested that his life was about to change forever. Officer Howard Floyd was 24 years old and had graduated from the police academy just 2 weeks prior to that fateful February afternoon. Standing at 5 feet 10 inches with a stocky build, Floyd carried himself with the aggressive swagger of someone desperate to prove his authority. His pale complexion reddened easily when he became agitated, and his small blue eyes had a tendency to narrow when he encountered situations that challenged his preconceived notions about the world. Floyd had grown up in rural Georgia, in a small town where the population was overwhelmingly white and diversity was something that existed only on television screens. His father worked as a security guard at a local manufacturing plant and spent evenings filling his son's head with stories about urban crime and the dangers of city life. Around the dinner table, the Floyd family regularly discussed their fears about what they saw as the breakdown of law and order in America's cities, always with thinly veiled racial undertones that shaped young Howard's worldview. During his time at the police academy, Floyd's instructors had noted several concerning patterns in his behavior. His training files contained multiple observations about his tendency toward aggression and his quick escalation of minor situations. The Academy psychologist had written a lengthy evaluation, noting Floyd's heightened suspicion toward minorities and his apparent belief that certain types of people were inherently more likely to be criminals. Despite these red flags, Floyd had managed to pass the minimum requirements and was cleared for duty. The psychological profile painted a picture of a young man who saw police work not as community service, but as a battle between good and evil, where he was destined to be the hero. Floyd had scored exceptionally well in physical training and weapons handling, but his performance in community relations and de-escalation scenarios had been consistently poor. His instructors noted that he seemed unable or unwilling to see situations from perspectives other than his own. Throughout his academy training, Floyd had filed an unusually high number of suspicious person reports during his practical exercises. A review of these reports revealed a disturbing pattern. 89% of the individuals he deemed suspicious were Black or Hispanic, despite the training scenarios being designed to include equal representation across all demographic groups. When questioned about this pattern, Floyd insisted that he was simply being thorough and that certain people naturally looked more suspicious than others. Floyd's social media history, which should have been more carefully scrutinized during the hiring process, revealed a troubling collection of posts and shared articles about urban crime. He frequently shared content that portrayed Black communities in negative terms and had liked numerous posts that promoted harmful stereotypes. His online activity showed someone who consumed media that reinforced his existing biases rather than challenging them. On his first day of solo patrol, Floyd had already made several radio calls reporting suspicious individuals. Each call involved Black men who were simply going about their daily business, walking to work, waiting for buses, or talking on their phones. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention, but the busy dispatch center had not yet recognized the troubling trend in Floyd's reporting. That morning, Floyd had attended a briefing where Detective Sergeant Jackson was supposed to be introduced as the new supervisor for Floyd's unit. However, Jackson had been delayed by court testimony in an ongoing case, so the introduction was postponed. This meant that when Floyd encountered Jackson on the street, he had no idea he was looking at his new boss. Floyd's mental state that afternoon was a dangerous combination of nervousness about his first solo day, eagerness to prove himself worthy of his badge, and deeply ingrained racial prejudices that had never been properly addressed or corrected. He was driving through downtown Jacksonville, actively looking for situations where he could demonstrate his law enforcement skills, his radio constantly crackling with updates from other officers who were handling real emergencies. When Floyd spotted Jackson walking down Bay Street, his biased worldview immediately interpreted the scene through a lens of suspicion and criminality. Here was a Black man in casual clothing, walking near the police station, and in Floyd's prejudiced mind, this could only mean one thing: trouble. The digital clock on the dashboard of Floyd's patrol car read 2:28 p.m. when Detective Jackson emerged from Murphy's Deli, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and his leather backpack slung over his shoulder. Jackson paused for a moment on the sidewalk, pulling out his phone to check for any urgent messages from headquarters. Finding nothing that required immediate attention, he slipped the device back into his pocket and began his leisurely walk toward the police station. The 3-block journey was one Jackson had made hundreds of times over his 15-year career. He knew every storefront, every crack in the sidewalk, every spot where the afternoon sun created perfect shadows. As he walked, he nodded to Mrs. Chen, who was sweeping in front of her flower shop, and waved to Miguel, the barber who always stepped outside for a cigarette at this time of day. These small interactions were part of what made Jackson love his job. He wasn't just a police officer, he was a member of this community. Meanwhile, Officer Floyd was driving his patrol car slowly down Bay Street, his eyes scanning the sidewalks with the intensity of a predator hunting for prey. He had been on duty for less than 6 hours, but his radio log already showed multiple calls to dispatch reporting suspicious individuals. Each report had been dismissed by more experienced officers who recognized that Floyd was seeing threats where none existed. Floyd's radio crackled with routine communications as he spotted a figure walking confidently down the sidewalk. The person was a Black man, wearing dark jeans and a navy hoodie, carrying a backpack. In Floyd's prejudiced mind, this combination of factors immediately triggered alarm bells. He had been taught at the academy to observe behavior and context, but his racial bias overrode any rational assessment of the situation. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247. Floyd spoke into his radio, his voice tight with what he believed was professional concern. "I have eyes on a suspicious black male in the vicinity of headquarters. Subject appears to be casing the building." The dispatcher's voice came back through the static. "Unit 247, can you describe the suspicious behavior you're observing?" Floyd watched as Jackson continued walking at a normal pace, occasionally glancing at storefronts and checking his phone. There was nothing remotely suspicious about Jackson's behavior, but Floyd's biased worldview interpreted ordinary actions through a lens of criminal intent. "Subject is walking slowly near the station, looking around, appears to be surveying the area," Floyd reported, his description bearing no resemblance to Jackson's actual casual stroll. "Requesting permission to make contact." "Copy that, Unit 247. Use your discretion, but remember to observe actual suspicious behavior." Floyd pulled his patrol car to the curb and stepped out, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon belt. The afternoon sun reflected off his badge as he began walking toward Jackson with purposeful, aggressive strides. His body language immediately conveyed hostility and suspicion, drawing curious glances from other pedestrians who sensed tension in the air. Jackson was approximately 50 yards away when Floyd first called out to him. The detective was lost in thought, mentally reviewing the case files in his backpack and considering how he would present the evidence in court the following week. He had no reason to expect that he was about to become the target of racial profiling by one of his own department's officers. "Hey, you there in the hoodie?" Floyd's voice cut through the ambient noise of downtown traffic and pedestrian chatter. "Stop right where you are!" The command was delivered with such authority and aggression that several people on the sidewalk turned to look. Jackson stopped mid-stride and turned toward the voice, his trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. He saw a young white officer in full uniform approaching him with obvious hostility, and his first instinct was professional curiosity rather than alarm. Jackson's 15 years of experience had taught him to remain calm in tense situations. He kept his hands visible and his posture non-threatening, drawing on the same de-escalation techniques he had used thousands of times when dealing with agitated citizens. His expression showed confusion, but no fear, as he genuinely had no idea why a police officer would be confronting him. "Excuse me, officer," Jackson replied in a calm, respectful tone that reflected his professional training. "Is there a problem?" Floyd continued his aggressive approach, his eyes narrowed and his jaw set in determination. In his mind, Jackson's calm confidence was actually a sign of guilt and defiance. The rookie officer had constructed a narrative in which any black man near the police station must be planning some kind of criminal activity, and Jackson's composed demeanor only reinforced this delusional belief. The distance between the two men closed quickly as Floyd strode forward with purpose. Other pedestrians began to take notice of the confrontation, with some stopping to watch and others pulling out their phones to record what appeared to be an unnecessary escalation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete as the two men faced each other, one a decorated veteran detective and the other a rookie officer whose career was about to implode. Jackson maintained his professional bearing, even as confusion clouded his features. He had dealt with nervous rookie officers before, and his instinct was to help defuse whatever misunderstanding had led to this confrontation. He had no way of knowing that Floyd's aggression was rooted in racial prejudice so deep that no amount of evidence or explanation would be able to penetrate it. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the ugly reality of racial bias within law enforcement and destroy the career of a rookie officer who had never been properly trained to overcome his prejudices. Floyd's aggressive posture became even more pronounced as he closed the remaining distance between himself and Jackson. The rookie officer's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, a motion that did not go unnoticed by the growing number of witnesses who had stopped to observe the unfolding confrontation. The afternoon sun glinted off Floyd's badge and the polished surface of his gun holster as he positioned himself in what he believed was a tactical advantage. "Don't play games with me," Floyd said, his voice carrying the kind of hostility typically reserved for confirmed criminals, rather than citizens walking peacefully down public sidewalks. "What are you doing casing the police station? You think we're stupid?" The accusation was so absurd and baseless that Jackson almost laughed, but his professional training prevented any reaction that might escalate the situation further. Instead, he maintained his calm demeanor, and began to provide the reasonable explanation that any rational officer would have welcomed. His voice remained steady and respectful, even as he began to realize that this confrontation was more serious than a simple misunderstanding. "I'm walking to work, officer," Jackson replied, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with tense situations. "I'm Detective Sergeant Jock Jackson with this department, and I think there's been some kind of mistake here." Floyd's reaction to Jackson's identification was immediate and telling. Rather than pausing to consider the possibility that he had made an error, the rookie officer's prejudices prevented him from even entertaining the notion that a black man in casual clothing could be a fellow police officer, let alone a decorated detective sergeant. His face contorted with what he believed was righteous indignation. "Oh, so now you're impersonating an officer too?" Floyd's voice dripped with sarcasm and contempt. "Real smart, genius. That's a felony." The crowd of witnesses continued to grow as Floyd's aggressive behavior drew more attention from passers-by. Several people had their phones out and were recording the interaction, sensing that something was very wrong with the way the rookie officer was treating someone who was clearly not posing any threat. The murmur of concerned voices could be heard in the background as people began to realize they were witnessing what appeared to be racial profiling in action. Jackson recognized that the situation was spiraling beyond reason, but his years of experience had taught him to remain professional even in the most challenging circumstances. He slowly and deliberately reached toward his jacket pocket, telegraphing his movements clearly to avoid giving Floyd any excuse to escalate further. "I can show you my badge and identification if you'll let me reach for them," Jackson said, his voice carrying the patience of someone who had dealt with countless difficult situations throughout his career. "This is all just a misunderstanding that we can clear up very quickly." Floyd's response revealed just how deeply his racial prejudices had poisoned his judgment. Instead of allowing Jackson to produce his credentials, which would have immediately resolved the situation, the rookie officer interpreted the movement as a potential threat. His hand moved closer to his weapon as his voice rose to a shout that could be heard clearly by all the witnesses. "Don't you dare reach for anything! Get on the ground now!" The command echoed off the surrounding buildings as Floyd drew his service weapon and pointed it directly at Jackson's chest. The crowd of witnesses gasped collectively, with several people calling out that the officer was making a terrible mistake. The scene had transformed from a simple street encounter into a potentially deadly confrontation, all because of one rookie officer's inability to see past his racial biases. Jackson's hands immediately went up in a gesture of compliance, his police training overriding any impulse to argue or resist. Even as he was being victimized by the very system he had served faithfully for 15 years, his professional instincts told him that the most important thing was to prevent the situation from becoming violent. His calm compliance stood in stark contrast to Floyd's aggressive escalation. "Officer, please listen to me," Jackson said, his voice remaining steady despite the weapon pointed at his chest. "I am a police detective with this department. My badge is in my jacket pocket. Please just check with headquarters before this goes any further." But Floyd was beyond reason. His worldview had constructed a narrative in which Jackson was a criminal, impersonating a police officer, and no amount of evidence or witness testimony would be able to penetrate the wall of prejudice that had formed in his mind. The rookie officer's finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger as he screamed commands at one of his own department's most respected detectives. The body cam footage would later show that Jackson never made a single threatening gesture, never raised his voice in anger, and never did anything that would justify Floyd's extreme response. Every word and action was captured in high-definition video that would become crucial evidence in the legal proceedings that would follow. Several witnesses began shouting at Floyd, with some recognizing Jackson from community events and others simply recognizing that an innocent man was being terrorized. Their voices created a chorus of protest that filled the afternoon air, but Floyd seemed deaf to anything that contradicted his predetermined narrative about the man standing before him with his hands raised in surrender. Despite Jackson's complete compliance and the growing chorus of witnesses shouting that Floyd was making a catastrophic mistake, the rookie officer's racial prejudices had created a reality so distorted that he could not process the truth, even when it was screaming at him from multiple directions. Floyd's weapon remained trained on Jackson's chest as he barked commands with the fervor of someone who believed he was apprehending a dangerous criminal rather than terrorizing an innocent colleague. The sound of Floyd's boots on concrete echoed sharply as he moved closer to Jackson, his free hand reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. Jackson remained motionless with his hands raised, his years of experience telling him that any sudden movement could trigger a tragic outcome. The detective's calm professionalism in the face of such treatment was remarkable, but it only seemed to further enrage Floyd, who interpreted Jackson's composure as arrogance. "I said get on the ground!" Floyd screamed again, his voice cracking with the strain of his misplaced authority. When Jackson began to slowly comply, lowering himself toward the concrete sidewalk, Floyd apparently decided that the movement was not fast enough for his liking. Without warning, he holstered his weapon and lunged forward, tackling Jackson with unnecessary force. The impact sent both men crashing to the concrete sidewalk with a sickening thud that made several witnesses cry out in alarm. Jackson's ribs connected hard with the unforgiving pavement, and his wrist was twisted painfully behind his back as Floyd applied handcuffs with far more force than the situation required. The sound of metal clicking into place seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed the violent takedown. Even as he was being brutalized, Jackson continued to demonstrate the professionalism that had defined his entire career. Rather than shouting in anger or fighting back against the assault, he used his training to try to de-escalate the situation and protect everyone involved, including the rookie officer who was destroying both their lives. "Officer Floyd," Jackson said through gritted teeth as pain shot through his injured ribs, "please check my identification. My name is Detective Sergeant Jack Jackson, badge number 4472. Call headquarters and ask for Sergeant Martinez. He can verify who I am." Floyd's hands shook slightly as he conducted an aggressive pat-down search of Jackson's person. When his fingers encountered the leather wallet containing Jackson's police credentials, there was a moment of hesitation. The rookie officer pulled out the badge and identification card, staring at them with an expression that revealed his internal struggle between accepting reality and maintaining his prejudiced narrative. For a brief instant, those watching thought that Floyd might recognize his terrible error and begin the process of making amends. The evidence was literally in his hands, proof positive that he had just assaulted a decorated police detective based on nothing more than racial profiling. But instead of acknowledging his mistake, Floyd's prejudices dug in even deeper. "This is fake!" Floyd declared loudly, holding up Jackson's legitimate police credentials for the growing crowd to see. "Where did you steal this badge from? You really think we're going to fall for this?" The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. Witnesses who had been merely concerned now became openly outraged as they watched a rookie officer refuse to accept clear evidence of his mistake. Several people began shouting that Floyd was wrong, that they recognized Jackson as a real police officer who worked in the community. Their voices created a cacophony of protests that filled the afternoon air. "That's Detective Jackson," called out Mrs. Rodriguez, who owned a nearby restaurant and had known Jackson for years. "He comes to our community meetings. You're making a huge mistake." Other voices joined hers, creating a chorus of testimony that should have convinced any reasonable person that a terrible error was occurring. But Floyd seemed incapable of hearing anything that contradicted his predetermined beliefs about the man lying handcuffed on the sidewalk before him. Floyd grabbed his radio with one hand while keeping the other on his weapon, his voice urgent as he called for backup. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247. I need immediate assistance at Bay Street and 3rd Avenue. I have in custody a subject impersonating a police officer with fake credentials. Repeat, subject is impersonating law enforcement and may be part of a larger criminal operation." The dispatch operator's voice crackled through the radio with a note of concern. "Unit 247, did you say the subject has police credentials? Have you verified the authenticity of those credentials with headquarters?" "Negative, dispatch. The credentials are obviously fake. Subject is a black male, approximately 6 feet tall, claiming to be a detective sergeant. No way this guy is one of ours." Those final words hung in the air like a poison cloud, revealing the depth of Floyd's racist assumptions. In his mind, a black man simply could not be a police detective, regardless of the evidence presented. His prejudices were so deeply ingrained that he was willing to dismiss physical proof and multiple witness testimonies rather than acknowledge that his worldview was fundamentally flawed. Jackson closed his eyes as he lay on the concrete, not from physical pain, but from the emotional weight of what was happening. In that moment, the decorated detective realized that his years of service, his community involvement, and his professional reputation meant nothing to the rookie officer whose prejudices had reduced him to a stereotype. The sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance as backup units responded to Floyd's call, their wailing growing louder as they approached the scene of what would become one of the most documented cases of racial profiling in recent memory. The wailing of sirens grew progressively louder as two backup patrol cars raced through downtown Jacksonville, their red and blue lights cutting through the afternoon sunlight. At 2:47 p.m., exactly 17 minutes after Floyd had first confronted Jackson, Sergeant Martinez pulled his patrol car to the curb with squealing brakes. The veteran supervisor stepped out of his vehicle and immediately surveyed the chaotic scene before him, his experienced eyes taking in the crowd of agitated witnesses, the multiple cell phones recording the incident, and the figure of a handcuffed man lying face down on the concrete sidewalk. Martinez had been with the Jacksonville Metropolitan Police Department for 12 years, and in that time, he had developed an instinct for recognizing when situations had gone terribly wrong. As he approached the scene, he could hear the angry voices of witnesses shouting about police misconduct and racial profiling. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people, with more arriving every minute as word of the incident spread through social media and text messages. It wasn't until Martinez got within 10 feet of the handcuffed figure that recognition hit him like a physical blow. The man lying on the sidewalk, his navy hoodie now torn and dirty from the violent takedown, was Detective Sergeant Jock Jackson, one of the most respected officers in the entire department. Martinez felt his stomach drop as the full magnitude of Floyd's error became clear. "Jesus Christ, Floyd!" Martinez shouted as he rushed toward the scene. "That's Detective Sergeant Jackson. What the hell have you done?" Floyd looked up from where he was standing, guard over his supposed prisoner, his face showing confusion rather than the dawning horror that the situation demanded. Even confronted by a senior officer who clearly recognized Jackson, the rookie remained convinced that he had apprehended a criminal impersonating a police officer. "Sarge, this guy had fake credentials," Floyd insisted, holding up Jackson's legitimate police identification. "He was casing the station and tried to pass himself off as one of ours. I've got him dead to rights on impersonation charges." Martinez snatched the identification from Floyd's hands and examined it closely. The credentials were clearly authentic, bearing all the proper security features and Jackson's photograph. The sergeant's hands trembled slightly as he knelt beside Jackson and began working to unlock the handcuffs with his universal key. "Detective Jackson, I am so sorry," Martinez said quietly as he removed the restraints. "This is a terrible mistake. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Jackson slowly pushed himself up from the concrete, wincing as pain shot through his bruised ribs and sprained wrist. Despite the physical discomfort and the profound humiliation of being arrested by one of his own officers, Jackson's first words demonstrated the professionalism that had defined his entire career. "Sergeant Martinez," Jackson said with remarkable composure, "I need you to ensure that all body cam footage and witness statements are properly preserved. This incident needs to be fully documented according to department protocols." The crowd of witnesses erupted in a mix of relief and continued anger as they watched Jackson being freed from the handcuffs. Several people approached Martinez offering to provide statements about what they had witnessed, their voices overlapping as they described Floyd's aggressive behavior and refusal to listen to reason. Martinez surveyed the scene with growing alarm, recognizing that the department was facing a potential crisis that could have far-reaching consequences. The veteran sergeant immediately called for additional supervisors and requested that crime scene investigators respond to document Jackson's injuries and preserve evidence. He also ordered paramedics to evaluate Jackson's condition, noting visible abrasions on his hands and the way the detective favored his left side. Meanwhile, Floyd continued to stand nearby, his expression showing confusion and growing defensiveness rather than remorse. When Martinez ordered him to return to his patrol car and wait for further instructions, Floyd actually argued, insisting that he had followed proper procedures and that everyone else was wrong about Jackson's identity. "I don't understand what's happening here," Floyd said, his voice taking on a petulant tone. "How was I supposed to know he was really a cop? He looked suspicious walking around the station. I was just doing my job." The comment sent ripples of outrage through the crowd of witnesses, several of whom began shouting that Floyd's behavior had been obviously motivated by racial prejudice. Martinez quickly moved to separate Floyd from the scene, recognizing that the rookie's continued presence was only making an already volatile situation worse. Within minutes, additional supervisors began arriving at the scene, including Captain Williams and Lieutenant Foster from the Internal Affairs Division. The arrival of command staff signaled that the incident was being treated with the utmost seriousness, and Martinez briefed them quickly on what had occurred. Jackson accepted medical treatment from the paramedics who examined his injuries and documented them with photographs for potential legal proceedings. Despite his physical discomfort, the detective insisted on providing a preliminary statement while the events were still fresh in his memory, demonstrating the same attention to detail that had made him such an effective investigator. News crews began arriving as word of the incident spread through the community, their satellite trucks lining Bay Street as reporters prepared to cover what was already being described as a shocking example of racial profiling within the police department. The body cam footage from Floyd's camera would soon be examined by internal affairs investigators, but the preliminary review showed clearly that Jackson had done nothing to justify the aggressive treatment he received. As the immediate crisis began to stabilize, the long-term consequences of Floyd's actions were just beginning to unfold, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately cost him his career and expose the department to millions of dollars in legal liability. Within 1 week of the incident, the wheels of justice began turning with unprecedented speed. On February 10, 2023, State Prosecutor Maria Gonzalez filed formal criminal charges against Officer Howard Floyd, citing overwhelming evidence from the body cam footage and multiple witness testimonies. The charges included false imprisonment in the first degree, official misconduct, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and assault and battery. Each charge carried significant potential prison time, and legal experts noted that the video evidence made Floyd's case virtually indefensible. Simultaneously, the Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a parallel civil rights investigation under the direction of Special Agent Robert Chen from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. The federal investigation focused on whether Floyd's actions constituted a violation of Jackson's constitutional rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, which criminalizes the willful deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Federal prosecutors indicated that, if convicted on the federal charges, Floyd could face up to 10 years in federal prison, significantly more than the state charges alone would carry. The Jacksonville Metropolitan Police Department wasted no time in addressing Floyd's employment status. On February 8, 2023, just 5 days after the incident, Police Chief Rodriguez convened a disciplinary hearing that lasted less than 2 hours. The hearing was largely a formality, as the body cam evidence clearly showed that Floyd had violated multiple department policies regarding use of force, racial profiling, and professional conduct. Floyd was terminated immediately, with Chief Rodriguez stating that his actions were incompatible with the values and standards of this department. Detective Sergeant Jackson, represented by the prestigious civil rights law firm of Morrison, Williams and Associates, filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit on February 15, 2023. The lawsuit named both Officer Floyd and the city of Jacksonville as defendants, seeking $2.3 million in damages for constitutional violations, emotional distress, physical injuries, and damage to Jackson's reputation and career. The lawsuit alleged that Floyd's actions were part of a pattern of racial discrimination within the department, and that the city had failed to properly screen and train its officers. The legal team representing Jackson was led by attorney Benjamin Morrison, who had successfully litigated dozens of police misconduct cases throughout his 30-year career. Morrison's firm immediately began gathering evidence, including Floyd's academy training records, his social media history, and testimonies from other officers who had witnessed concerning behavior during Floyd's brief tenure. The evidence painted a clear picture of an officer whose racial prejudices had never been adequately addressed by the department's hiring and training processes. City attorneys found themselves in an almost impossible position, trying to defend the case. The body cam footage showed Floyd's actions so clearly that there was virtually no room for legal maneuvering or alternative interpretations. Internal memos revealed that city legal staff recommended early settlement negotiations to avoid the additional costs and negative publicity of a prolonged trial. Insurance adjusters estimated that the city's potential liability could exceed $3 million when legal fees and punitive damages were factored into the equation. Floyd's criminal case proceeded through the court system with remarkable efficiency. His defense attorney, Robert Palmer, attempted to argue that Floyd had acted in good faith based on his training and observations, but this defense crumbled under the weight of the video evidence. The body cam footage showed clearly that Jackson had exhibited no suspicious behavior whatsoever, and that Floyd's assumptions were based purely on racial stereotyping. On July 18, 2023, after a 3-day trial that garnered national media attention, a jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding Floyd guilty on all charges. The verdict was met with applause from the packed courtroom gallery, which included many members of Jacksonville's black community who had followed the case closely. Judge Patricia Henderson sentenced Floyd to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, noting that his actions had undermined public trust in law enforcement and caused immeasurable harm to community relations. The civil lawsuit reached resolution even more quickly than the criminal case. On August 3, 2023, the city of Jacksonville agreed to settle Jackson's lawsuit for $1.8 million, along with a comprehensive agreement to implement police reforms. The settlement included mandatory bias training for all officers, revised hiring procedures with enhanced psychological screening, and the establishment of an independent oversight board to investigate complaints of racial profiling. As part of the settlement agreement, the city also agreed to federal monitoring of its police department for a period of 5 years. The Department of Justice entered into a consent decree with Jacksonville, requiring regular audits of hiring practices, training procedures, and complaint investigations. The federal oversight was designed to ensure that the systemic issues that allowed Floyd to become a police officer would be addressed comprehensively. Floyd's personal financial situation deteriorated rapidly following his conviction and termination. Facing mounting legal bills and the $1.8 million judgment against him personally, he filed for bankruptcy protection in September 2023. The bankruptcy filing revealed that Floyd had accumulated over $200,000 in legal debt and had no realistic prospect of paying the substantial damages awarded to Jackson. The case became a landmark example of how quickly and decisively the justice system could respond when police misconduct was captured on video with such clarity that denial became impossible. 2 years after the incident that shocked Jacksonville and made national headlines, the lives of both men involved had taken dramatically different paths. Detective Sergeant Jock Jackson returned to active duty 6 months after the settlement, but the experience had fundamentally changed both his perspective and his role within the department. Rather than allowing the traumatic experience to embitter him or drive him from law enforcement, Jackson chose to channel his ordeal into meaningful reform efforts that would help prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Jackson accepted a promotion to lieutenant in January 2024, taking on the responsibility of overseeing the department's newly created Community Relations and Bias Prevention Unit. In this role, he became the face of police reform efforts in Jacksonville, working directly with community leaders, civil rights organizations, and academy instructors to develop training programs that addressed racial bias in law enforcement. His personal story became a powerful teaching tool, and he frequently spoke at police academies across the state about the importance of recognizing and confronting prejudice within the ranks. The settlement money allowed Jackson to secure his family's financial future, but he used a significant portion of the funds to establish the Jackson Foundation for Police Accountability, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting transparency and racial equality in law enforcement. The foundation provided legal assistance to victims of police misconduct and funded research into bias prevention training methods. Jackson's wife Maria became the foundation's executive director, working alongside her husband to turn their traumatic experience into a catalyst for positive change. Jackson's 3 children, who had initially struggled with seeing their father's arrest, shared widely on social media, eventually became proud advocates for their father's reform work. His oldest son, who had been studying criminal justice, wrote his senior thesis on racial profiling in police departments, using his father's case as a central example. The family's ability to transform trauma into purpose became an inspiration to many in the Jacksonville community. Professionally, Jackson found that his experience as a victim of police misconduct made him a more effective investigator and supervisor. His colleagues noted that he brought a unique perspective to cases involving racial tensions, and his ability to build bridges between the police department and minority communities became invaluable. The respect he had earned through his dignified handling of the incident elevated his status within the department and the broader law enforcement community. In stark contrast, Howard Floyd's life spiraled into a series of increasingly desperate circumstances following his conviction and bankruptcy. After serving 14 months in state prison, Floyd was released on parole in September 2024, but found himself unemployable in law enforcement and struggling to find work in any field that required background checks. His criminal record and the widespread media coverage of his case made him a pariah in his hometown and forced him to relocate multiple times in search of employment opportunities. Floyd's attempts to find steady work were repeatedly thwarted by the viral nature of the body cam footage, which continued to circulate on social media and appeared prominently in internet searches of his name. He worked a series of temporary jobs in construction and food service, but was frequently fired when employers discovered his background. The stress of unemployment and social isolation took a severe toll on his mental health, and he was hospitalized twice for depression and anxiety-related conditions. The financial judgment against Floyd remained a constant burden, as his bankruptcy discharge did not eliminate the civil rights damages owed to Jackson. Court-appointed monitors tracked his income, garnishing a percentage of his wages whenever he found employment. This created a vicious cycle where Floyd struggled to maintain steady work while also facing ongoing financial obligations that seemed impossible to fulfill. By late 2024, Floyd was living in a small apartment in rural Alabama, working part-time at a warehouse and attending court-mandated counseling sessions designed to address his racial biases. His probation officer reported that Floyd had made some progress in understanding the impact of his actions, but noted that he continued to minimize his responsibility and blame external factors for his situation. The contrast between the two men's outcomes became a powerful symbol in discussions about police accountability and reform. Jackson's transformation from victim to advocate demonstrated how individuals could rise above trauma to create positive change, while Floyd's downward trajectory served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. The case continued to influence police training programs across the country, with the body cam footage being used as a teaching tool in academies nationwide. Legal scholars cited Jackson versus Floyd as a landmark case demonstrating how clear video evidence and swift legal action could provide both individual justice and systemic reform. Jackson often reflected that while the incident had been traumatic, it had ultimately provided him with a platform to address issues he had long recognized within law enforcement. His work continued to honor the principle that even the most painful experiences could be transformed into opportunities for positive change, ensuring that his ordeal would contribute to a more just and equitable future for policing in America.